Okay, so are we all sorted technology-wise? Yeah, very good. So 3:10, my end of the woods. So I think it's a good time to start. I would like to first of all welcome everybody for being with us today. It's the panel that we are very much sort of looking forward to, and we've discussed this sort of the aims earlier in the week as part of our first Utopia Languages Week. And the first Utopia Languages very much wants to and aims to bring us all together to engage with diversity and with the kind of the global campuses and global education that we all want to have and to be part of. But also to give us spaces to reflect and to really think about the multilingual profile of our contemporary societies, what linguistic diversity actually means, and how and to what extent that can translate to linguistic equality. So we have a wonderful sets here. I can't think of experts who would be more appropriate and suitable to really provide a reflection and provide a discussion on this topic. And I'm going to very briefly introduce them. I'm only going to introduce them by name and by their institution. Their short biographies are already on the site, so you saw them as you were registering to be with us today, and they have all been very influential and established in their part of the discipline, but also bring experiences that are really central to both the phenomena, the opportunities and the challenges that we're going to discuss today. So the panel today is very much a space for reflection, a space to actually learn from each other's experience, and to really debate, not necessarily to provide answers to all questions, but to actually really have a shared thinking and start sort of raising some opportunities that we could together, particularly in the context of university alliances, consider how and to what extent we want to do things differently, and in terms of what is the role of the modern university, how do we actually see interacting in this sort of very much fast-paced changing world around us. So my name is Joan Guri. I'm a professor in social linguistics at the University of Warwick. I'm also in the central curriculum team, the education team of the Utopia Alliance, and it's a real privilege to be and to facilitate and to be here today with our panelists. And I'm going to introduce them as I see them on my screen, and you will also hear more as they start addressing some of the challenges and the questions that I have on the menu for us to discuss today. So Professor Anna Defina from Georgetown University. Hello, Anna. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I'm very pleased that the time difference has worked well. Helena Wall, who has submitted her thesis and is waiting for her viva, but is here also in her identity as the project officer for the Migration Identity and Translation Network, very much looking into multilingualism in a disrupted society. Helena, the University of Warwick. Helena, thank you very much for being here today. Professor Panos Athanasopoulos from Lancaster University. Thank you very much, Pano. You gave a fantastic opening plenary earlier for the Utopia Languages Week. Thank you for being so generous with your time and coming back for this panel as well. Professor Julie Kerekes from University of Toronto. Hello, Julie. A lot of work on multilingualism, migration and integration in different ways, and particularly also on the intercultural side of language learning. So very interested in your experiences on the multilingual university students, and thank you very much for also making time to be with us today. And Professor Jean-Marc Devail from the University of Birkbeck, University of London, very much sort of crossing the boundaries of the different disciplines on language learning, multilingualism, psycholinguistics. And thank you for being here and sharing your experiences with us and with all the participants and the attendants. So thank you all. It's a great pleasure. So what we're going to do today is something slightly different to the traditional panel. So our panelists are not going to each present slides with some of their latest work. What they have been invited to do is really to give us a reflection, a commentary on some big and broad questions and challenges. And I'm going to start and give them sort of the first big one. And we're going to please, for all of those of you with us today, use the chat for any questions as we go along. I will pose also and open the floor for any more questions. But we want that, of course, to be interactive. So any questions or comments are most welcome. So to get us started, we're talking a lot about multilingualism, multilingualism as an ideal. We often talk about multilingualism as a very good thing. And we also talk about sort of multilingual ideals in education. Also, we talk about the need and the capital that the sort of multilingual speakers bring to societies. And I want to actually start unpacking some of those discourses and some of the sort of understandings and ideologies and hegemonies that are perpetuated, and ask you to share your reflections from the a lot of significant experience you have in your respective end of the discipline, to actually really share how you see the perceived value of multilingualism in society, or lack of. What do you think it explains it, and what do you think can be done or should be done about it? So, Anna, can I start with you?
Yes. I don't know. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. And, I'll try to keep it short, but you can cut me off also, because I know there are many speakers, so I don't want to go on and on. But so let me start with with the idea whether you asked, is multilingualism valued in society? And I think it's still completely undervalued in general, both in the US and in Europe. Of course, I have experience of both countries, but more in the US. If you look at it superficially, there are a lot of discourses about multilingual competence being good for professionals, multilingual skills being important. And certainly there is that understanding for certain layers of society. But first of all, the value of multilingualism is always attached only to certain layers of the population. And secondly, so people who are professionals, or certainly in the higher echelons of society. And secondly, when multilingualism is seen positively, even within those spheres, it's because of its supposed economic value. So it's considered like a marketable skill. But all the rest that comes with multilingualism, which is, the experience with different cultures and greater sense of diversity and relativism and so on, all of that is not in the center of attention when we're talking about multilingualism in that sense. There are, however, also a lot of symptoms in my view of how multilingualism is not valued in society. First of all, if you think of, for example, even starting from our own profession, the first departments that go when there is a crisis are departments of languages. And language departments are always losing students, are always fighting for students. So that's symptoms of the fact that people don't value the knowledge of languages as something that is really important in their career or in their learning progress. In general, I feel that there is still a very strong monolingual habit, both in the US and in the EU. So a monolingual habit, which means that we see monolingualism as the normal situation, the monolingual speaker as the normal person, and the multilingual speakers as exotic at best and threatening at worst. So that translates into also, and it's also related to this idea, this relationship that is so strong between being monolingual and being, especially in the language of the country, the country that we live in, and being a good citizen. So there is this assimilation between monolingualism and good citizenship, which has a lot of terrible consequences, because everybody that does not in principle or by birth speak the language of the country is regarded as a potential threat, has to assimilate, has to be integrated, and so on. So you've seen, in Europe, for example, but also in the US, the citizenship process is centered also around the language learning and learning of the local language, of the national language. So there is an assimilation between the good citizen and the speaker of the national language, which is quite discouraging for multilingual development, because it means that people abandon their language, or that they're led to abandon their language. Other symptoms that you see, besides the multiplication of language testing related to citizenship, for example, the lack of translation facilities. I mean, if you go to the US, to a hospital, to a court, to the courts, to school, there are very few translation services, and it's considered something that is the duty of the immigrant to find their way in this maze, and sometimes to look for a translator that sometimes is a family member, but certainly there's very little provision of translation services in those central institutions. If there was a valuing of multilingualism, there would be attention to that, for example. Also, I think another interesting point is, for example, if you look at census data, there are very few countries that ask questions about multilingual use in families. And when they do so in a kind of a skewed way. For example, they only ask, what's your main language? Irrespective of context of usage, of abilities in different environments. And they ask you, how well can you speak English, for example. This is the case of the census in England, in the UK. So, these are just some examples. I think my colleagues can add, but that I think are present in Europe and in the UK, of how monolingualism is considered the norm, and multilingualism is devalued.
Yeah.
Why is that? I think we can discuss, but I think for one, because we are still experiencing, the heritage of colonialism, where there is one language which is considered superior to another or to many others. And on the other hand, because of this idea of monolingualism being the good or the unmarked or the normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for really raising the issue that it is very much at the heart of what we wanted to achieve with this panel, which is to think about the tension between the multilingual profile of society and the issues around the socio-political equality and what linguistic hierarchies and exclusions do to social cohesion, social justice, but also the collective ability we actually have to address sort of the kind of problems we have, but also what it means for the values of society, what it means as to how we understand the good citizen, and how the sort of monolingual, multilingual ideals clash. So thank you very much for really raising the topics that we're going to sort of unpack for the rest of the panel. Really excellent start. Julie, can I invite you to come in and continue, and also add to the why of the monolingual ideal why, and also move us towards both the why and is there anything that can be done?
Yes, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. First of all, thank you, Anna, very much for sharing those perspectives. When I was thinking about this question, the perceived value of multilingualism in society or lack of, I have to acknowledge my bias that I thought a lot more about the perceived value than the lack of. And I appreciate very much, Anna, that you pointed out the reality that, in fact, it's not appreciated. Multilingualism is not appreciated as much as and I think probably everyone here at this roundtable would like it to be. Nevertheless, what I'd like to share is a little bit more about some of the perceived values. And I'd like to distinguish, I'm not entirely sure that across the countries, the terms multilingualism and plurilingualism are used in the same ways, but I was thinking about multilingualism, which is the subject of this question, in terms of more than one language being used in different environments, but not necessarily several languages being used by one person or one group of people. And I was thinking of plurilingualism, which is really what I have been more oriented towards, as welcoming many languages within one context, quite possibly within one speaker or within one group of interlocutors. And what I think is important to note in the context of Anna's points about monolingualism still being kind of a norm is that we and this roundtable represent very powerful stakeholders, but not the majority of the world for whom plurilingualism is normalized. So yes, absolutely. In North America and Europe, monolingualism is still an ideal in many parts. And I think we are important minorities, we here at this roundtable, both because we don't agree with that monolingual ideal, and yet we do represent the minority of the world in which the majority has that ideal. So, but plurilingualism is normal, and it has been normalized in pretty much the rest of the world. We have a lot to learn from them. I was thinking about two perspectives, multilingualism as resource and multilingualism as a right. And perhaps the less severe of those perspectives is one which is presented by a network called the Language Friendly School, which I think I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I'll quote from their brochure that says, multilingualism is not an obstacle to overcome, but a valuable resource to utilize. And I think that many of us see it that way, that we celebrate our students and celebrate our colleagues who share different sociolinguistic backgrounds as a resource that enriches our teaching environments, learning environments, professional environments. A more extreme perspective is that of Angelica Galante, one of the leaders in plurilingualism research, who says that it's not about allowing other languages, it's a basic human right. And the perspective I would add to that is that while I agree with that, I want to consider the complexities of that statement, because I would argue that unity is also a human right, unity and peace. And the question is how to balance the right for different languages to be used and the right for people to have opportunities to get along well and to communicate with each other in peaceful ways, whether or not they share a language. So I'm almost done, but I will just close this turn by saying that I thought about the value of multilingualism in terms of ideologies, the ideology of celebrating different people's individualities, their group identities, but from different groups. But it's also practical in terms of being able to promote a mutual understanding by providing information in different languages and by offering people opportunity to communicate in many different languages. But it's so emotional, and in order to honor people's identities by welcoming, celebrating, and encouraging multilingualism, languages can also be used to build borders and to break down communication. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to hearing from the rest of you.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you really for introducing very much the issue around rights and around linguistic rights, linguistic human rights, and how that interacts with the societies we want and the societies we live in, and also what can be done in achieving or not. So we're going to turn to that a bit later, but also how and to what extent we, as thinking as sort of minorities of ourselves in terms of those ideologies and those discourses, how and to what extent we can reach other groups of population, which clearly we haven't done in so many ways. And actually what we see around the sort of the questioning of expertise is very much a sort of a product of the time, and it's actually catastrophic in so many ways. So hopefully we're going to actually come back to some of that. Helena, I want to turn to you. You've served the multilingual ideal in many different ways and capacities during your PhD years, and also as a project officer for a network that very much looks into crossing and creating those spaces to bring together those interested in those topics and those areas, and also finding ways to transcend linguistic, cultural, discipline, university borders, sharing and disseminating research. So I want to pass on the floor to you from your perspective on the value of multilingualism from a very different career stage and a very different sort of stage of having engaged with some of those big questions and challenges.
Thank you very much, Jo. As you just pointed out, I'm coming at this perspective from very much more the thought processes of the student, as opposed to the pedagogist and the researcher that the other members of this panel are utilizing. I think that what I would like to do really is to pick up on what Anna said about the exoticization of multilingualism, because what I've had in my perspective in my role as project officer in facilitating those opportunities that Jo has just mentioned is I have been able to view, as it were, the progression of how languages and how multilingualism are represented at the earlier stages of education, and then seeing how that plays out in the higher education sphere. Certainly in this country, languages in the policies and the mindset of education are exoticized. Languages that are taught in schools tend to be languages that are traditionally taught, i.e. French, Spanish, German, and less so the languages that for many of the parts of the UK are actually far more likely to be seen in the linguistic landscape, there are many more people studying French, for example, at school than are studying Punjabi or Polish. But we know from research that there are so many places in the UK, Coventry being one of them, where you would be more likely to see those languages in the linguistic landscape. So we have a situation here where even where you are even allowed to study languages, because often you're not, in the rural area where I grew up, many further education providers simply didn't let you do languages. And if you could get to one where it did let you do a language, you didn't have a choice. They would provide one, if any. So we have a situation here where, because languages are exoticized, they're either something that isn't done, or if it is done, it's not rooted in the surroundings. What we then have is a situation where, in the higher education sphere, even those students who are enthused, who are passionate, who really recognize that we have, as Julie said, so much to learn from the rest of the world, where multilingualism is the reality that is valued, even they still are coming off that mindset of exoticization. When I work with students on research into multilingualism, helping them to do their own undergraduate research on topics in multilingualism, or helping them to organize student conferences, for example, in topics on multilingualism, that disconnect still exists even amongst these enthused students. And it comes up when I say we're publishing these blogs on the website, and you can do, and we do them in multiple different languages. That's still met with amazement that they're actually allowed to, or they come here and they're surprised that they're allowed to contribute to the community spaces and the community boards with messages or with texts that are in other languages, even though the whole purpose of those spaces is to facilitate multilingual discourse. There is still that mindset that, yes, we can talk about multilingualism, but we're only allowed to do it in English, aren't we? So I think that mindset of exoticization is feeding through from the earliest stages of education to the higher education context. And I'm not speaking only of English students, I'm also speaking of students from elsewhere in Europe. So that I think is part of the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, as it were, of how multilingualism is valued and is perceived. Value, exotic value, isn't the same thing as the value of society and the value of its use in our everyday lived practices.
Thank you very much, Helena. This is, I think, an excellent framing of also bringing in the significant role of education and formal education, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to that towards the end of the panel, where we actually really connect also with what is it that, in a sense, we can do and how we may need to think of a different educational model across the years of education. Jean-Marc, I want to pass on to you. You've been serving multilingualism in different capacities, and I think you've addressed most of the issues that our sort of Helena has already raised in different ways. So I think it's a very natural continuation to pass on the floor to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you also for inviting me. It's a pleasure to participate in a roundtable on something that we are all passionate about, and we would like to make more people passionate or at least aware of the issues that we raise. I wanted to say something positive, and it's an interesting situation, really, that national governments tend to be less positive about multilingualism than international governments. Just thinking about the European Union, that has as official policy that learners in European country classrooms should learn, in addition to their first language, that they should learn at least 2 other languages. So you could say that that is an official recognition that there is value to multilingualism. And the 2 languages is probably also because they want to escape the situation where the only foreign language would be English. And so that in addition, if you are a Flemish speaker, you would hence use Dutch at school. You typically would have French and English as foreign languages, and you would typically also pick a fourth or even a fifth language. That's less likely to happen, of course, in the UK and in many other countries. But I would say that the European Union shows a good positive example of appreciation of multilingualism. The other thing I wanted to say, that obviously it's more than just multilingualism, it's multiculturalism also. So I'm sure Panos will have to add something about it. It's not just the tool for communication, it's really the thinking that goes with it, and the realization that people not just use different languages and where you could use Google Translate, but that they may have different values, different non-verbal behaviors, that they may see the world in different ways. And I think that that is also one of the things that is probably missing in national curricula, that learning a language is much more than this Google Translate ability, that it is in fact the ability to connect with other people on a much more profound level. And I would refer to the work of Batia Mesquita, who is a Belgian cultural psychologist and who compares languages and cultures to dances. And so she's interested in how people in different cultures express their emotions. And she points out that, in fact, that is only the most superficial level, meaning that knowing how to declare your love in a foreign language doesn't make you able to actually perform that speech act appropriately. That you need to know not just that move, but how that move fits into a dance. And that's the perspective that she uses, that in fact, as a Dutch academic, she went to the United States, lived there for 15 years, realized that she knew the language, but that she was not quite getting the fact that they were dancing differently. That after a party in the United States, you don't say, oh, this was such a nice, gezellig get-together, and we were all so connected. That's not what you say. You praise the organizer of the party for having done such a brilliant job. And she realized that she didn't get it, and that it took her a while before she was able to dance along with her American interactor, the people she was interacting with, without stepping on their toes. So yeah, just this fact that we are talking about multilingualism, but in fact we are talking about much more than just that. So I think this is perfect for Panos to take over and continue.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. I think that's very much of sort of having the very right panelists, creating the flow without the facilitator needed to do much. So thank you very much. Panos, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, I extend my thanks for inviting me and others here to talk about fascinating topics. I mean, of course, yes, like Julie said, we are really preaching to the converted here. We all agree, about these things. Jean-Marc covered about half of what I wanted to say, so thank you for that. It's good because I have to go in a few minutes to give a talk in Greece. So this is going to be, I think, my only contribution here. And I think I want to say, of course, like Jean-Marc said, learning a new language is not just learning a new language. You learn a new way of thinking. You even learn about cultures that you knew nothing about. I think, about my high school years when I was learning Greek and Latin in school, and these are dead languages, of course, but you learned a lot about how people thought. How we learned jokes in Latin. They were so lame, but still, you just learned about how these people, what they found funny, stuff like that, which was fascinating. But I think, going to the heart of the question that Joe posed, what is the perceived value of multilingualism in society? I would really say, and I think a few of you, especially Anna at the beginning, kind of raised this as well. I would say it depends who's doing the multilingualism. right? And this, of course, is nothing new. We all know this. So if it's the dominant monolingual culture learning other languages, so Greek speakers in Greece or English speakers in the UK learning French or German, then that's good. That's okay. Or, you know, depending on what they want to use it for to make more money or to travel or to just as an intellectual exercise. Of course, if it is done by immigrants or by a group that is considered outsiders to the, you know, host culture, then it's bad. You know, hearing Polish in buses or whatever other language, and, you know, that kind of tends to be looked down upon, you know, with this monolingual societal ideal. And, you know, things, I was reading about these things when I was an undergraduate student of linguistics 25 years ago. These tensions, you know, and how multilingualism has been perceived, at least from the beginning of the 20th century until then. And nothing has changed in 25. There's still the same issues, you know, how, you know, depending who's doing the multilingualism, this is how society is going to perceive it. And because I will have to go in a couple of minutes, I will segue into the next question. I think I was the first in line anyway to speak there according to Joe's schedule, which is what are the key issues for a linguistically inclusive society? And I want to bring this in now because I think it's really related to this question. And again, it's something that Anna raised as well, you know, how, or Helena as well, you know, the importance of teaching languages in schools and how actually that has become less and less important, especially in Anglo-speaking cultures like the US or the UK. Speaking about the UK, I would say that the problem is much more fundamental. It's not just multilingualism, but lingualism, like language in general. You know, it's if you look at how student pupils here are taught grammar, for example, in school, and compare it to other European countries, it's I think it's lacking. You know, people don't value the fact that you kind of, you know, need to use language, and that language can be used to communicate ideas, and you can, you know, use languages and or the structure of your language in different ways. So if people aren't really bothered about the native language, how can we expect them to be bothered about other, you know, languages? So yeah, I will just stop here, and I will I'll just wave in 2 minutes time. I will have to wave, but yeah, Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Pano. That's thank you again, both for Monday and for today, and for really framing very nicely the issue of the next question and introducing it. I think really you're actually going very much to the sort of the heart of the second part, where to actually turn our attention about language and what is the role that, how we understand it, how we value it, and what does this actually mean. And I also want to start opening up to also not to think of language in the conversation we have today also in terms of the national language construct, because that's also something that is a very important part of also the conversation we have, that we talk about varieties, and of course we talk about hierarchies that come with those varieties, and of course the issues and the way we frame it, and they kind of in the spirit of the Utopia Languages Week is very much related to speakers of multiple varieties. But the issues that Pano, you raised now very much apply when we talk to dialects, when we talk about glottophobia, where we talk about accent discrimination. So it's really very much the conversation. This panel is so fundamental to societal values, to power asymmetries, and how actually language, sort of capital L, not sort of national language, is the arena where we're actually doing inclusion and exclusion, and where we actually sort of fence and index who is one of us and who is the other, and who is legitimized to become one of us. And this is really fundamental, and something that I think it's so much brought in the conversation from the different perspectives that you all bring. So thank you very much that you actually really moved exactly where this second big big issue that we are now going to address, wanted us to be.
Yeah, thank you, and
thank you.
and thank you all. And
Thank
sorry I have to leave. This is going to be so interesting. I'm going to miss
Thank you.
a lot.
Well,
But it's great to see you all.
We agreed that we're going to bring you back for the second Utopia Languages Week next year. So this to be continued.
Hold it somewhere sunny, somewhere nice.
Okay, I'm sure we have. Utopia has 10 universities. I think we will definitely make sure to meet the challenge.
Perfect.
See you.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye. So Jean-Marc, over to you. I think Panos already selected you're sort of going next. So over to you to sort of really continue the thinking on what we actually, when we talk about any linguistic inclusive society, what are the issues that you see from your end?
I think to get to a more inclusive society, the key point would be to convince people that other languages are never a threat. Because that's the kind of instinctive reaction, and you regularly read in the press. I think before the last elections, there was a British politician who, I forget who it was, who said that he had been in a train surrounded by people speaking another language but English, and that he had felt alienated and threatened by that. Although these people were obviously just minding their own business using their own languages. So I think we need to be able to convince the general public that other languages are never a threat. That because you don't understand what other people are saying to each other, doesn't mean that they are talking to each other about how to kill you, basically. And I think that in order to get there, you also need to make people aware of the monolingual ideology, because very often they are totally unaware that they have this ideology. Just like Panos said, that they may be in fact totally unaware that they are speaking English, and that English is a language with particular linguistic structures and cultural conventions, etc. If you cannot think outside the box, it's very hard to understand what is going on inside it. So we need, as teachers, I think they have the key role to invite different perspectives, different languages from students in their classroom, and just point out that, oh, look, this emotion concept in English doesn't exist in this other language, but in this other language, you have that fascinating concept that is really hard to translate into English. And I think it's a way for learners to realize, oh, there are other ways to look at the world, and that is an eye-opener that can be really exciting and really interesting. And then I think that needs to be integrated in training of teachers, of psychotherapists, of service providers, policemen, judges, anyone who deals with people, with the broad public, with people who may not have the same first language, and explain to them that having another language in the therapy, even if you don't understand that language as therapist, is no threat to you, that it can be useful to hear that and then to discuss it. And I think that with the translanguaging approach in education, this is also the way things are going, that we try to convince teachers that it's okay to allow your students to use the language and to show that you value the cultural and linguistic capital linked to that. Just as if you are a multilingual client with a psychotherapist, then your multilingualism, your multiculturalism is a crucial part of your identity, and it should be recognized by your therapist. Otherwise, the therapist is only looking at one very superficial version of you. So yeah, that's my point.
I'm very tempted to actually really probe a little bit on that, and I'm then going to turn to you, Helena. But before that, Jean-Marc, I was very I mean, there is no doubt that we are the choir here talking to the choir and so on. So I was actually very tempted when you think about the need to convince people. And of course, in a sense, it's great that you bring education. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But in a sense, if we're talking about those sort of deep societal asymmetries, and we're talking about those sort of hierarchies between us and the other, and sort of what you're describing is much more of a society where it's a more equal society, where the other is not a threat, the other is not to actually stay out. In a world that is becoming more and more xenophobic, that we actually, and I'm very keen to go back a bit later to Anna on this and all the work that Anna you've been doing recently in terms of sort of really rethinking of those sort of mobilities and kind of concepts around multilingualism, migration, and so on. But what you're saying, Jean-Marc, are we really talking about a different society in the end, a sort of an equal society? Because is it possible to convince? Is it about convincing? Is it about different sort of ideals that would be served from having linguistic equality? Because we know that languages are linguistically equal, but socially unequal. So if you're talking about the sort of social equality and access to capital and access to opportunity and so on, are we really talking about sort of a different social order, and how do you see that compared to the sort of the geopolitical circumstances around us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, good point. And the thing is that in the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of our liberal values being eroded, and increase of xenophobia, and Brexit was undoubtedly linked to that. And that's also probably why we have fewer students wanting to learn foreign languages, because, why would they? They assume that everybody in the world speaks English and that is good enough. So we shouldn't give up the fight. And the whole point is that the fight can probably never be completely won, but that we at least need to try to absolutely lose it. And that we need to make a constant argument that this is in fact a matter of social justice, that this is just as important as gender equality and racial equality, that we have in fact multilingualism as part of society, and that nobody should be discriminated again based on their language profiles, whatever those languages are. And that elite bilingualism is one thing, but that the minority language spoken at home is just as valuable to that individual and his or her family.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. And I really want to make sure that we come back to this concept of activism. And we talk and we strive a lot in academia to have this sort of neutrality and being distant from sort of activism in different meanings and norms. And I would be very interested in actually coming back and think a little bit about how and to what extent we would see as making our disciplines relevant to those sort of big issues, and sort of what we see as really contributing to making the world a better place, how we would actually take this sort of agenda or re-engage with those agendas. Helena, back to you. I think you really raised something very important with the exotization, and there are some very interesting comments already in the chat about that, and I think it's a very natural continuation now from where Panos and Jean-Marc were going with the issue.
Thank you very much, Jo. Just building on what Jean-Marc said about the sense of will the fight ever be completely won? Given the pervasiveness of the one nation, one language ideologies that pop up throughout history, it does seem that language is so intertwined with identity that perhaps it would be impossible, or perhaps not even justified to try to disassociate those concepts. What seems perhaps more realistic and hopefully valuable is the idea of accepting diversity of language. I mean, the example that you raised about a politician, I'm not familiar with this, but a politician stating that he felt alienated by hearing other languages spoken around him on the train. That would be a context where they have a right to be speaking a language that you happen not to understand. You don't have to, there doesn't have to be provision for you to understand what their conversation is. So that is a use of a language which you don't have to understand, and therefore it's quite okay for them to not make sure that you do. So moving past language at its most basic as a tool for communicating, that would be an example of a context where difference is something to be celebrated, and the diversity of languages is something that should be totally accepted in that context and totally celebrated. If somebody feels alienated by that situation, then it is perhaps more because they expected to feel alienated, and they expected to feel that they had a right to understand. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy there, because we know that there are so many people who absolutely love to hear different languages spoken around them, and we know that that's the start of many people's language learning journey. The idea of hearing that and not wanting to stop it, but wanting to join in. So I think linguistic inclusivity is maybe less about trying to create rules around where people can use languages or want to use languages, but more about just trying to undermine that mindset that caused that person to feel alienated in the first place. Because if people don't feel that way, then it won't matter that there are different languages, and it wouldn't matter if there were contexts where people ended up speaking just one because they were all trying to understand each other. That wouldn't matter either. It's the underlying mindset that's caused them to feel alienated that needs to be tackled.
Thank you very much, Helena. And again, really great to actually see the framing that you give from your perspective. And I think if we manage to really be successful in enthusing and inspiring others to actually also serve those ideals, I think we will have we will have definitely made the fight that Jean-Marc is talking about much more sort of having good prospects to actually win at least some of the battles, if not the sort of, if we are to take that metaphor. Julie, over to you.
Köszönöm. Fogok beszélni egy pillanatig magyarul, hogy legyen lehetőség a közönségnek és maguknak tapasztalni azt, hogy milyen érzés, ha beszélek itt egy nyelven, és nem értenek engem. Milyen érzés ez? Meglepetés? Rossz? És bocsánat, ha mégis van valaki itt, aki beszél magyarul, mert akkor nyilván magának, vagy maguknak, hogy nyilván, hogy beszélek magyarul, mint második nyelvet. De a lényeg az, hogy fontos, hogy normális legyen a helyzet, hogy néha az ember nem érti meg, amit az emberek körülötte mondanak. So in line with what Jean-Marc said, we need to normalize plurilingualism. How did you feel when I was speaking Hungarian? Did you feel threatened? Did you feel indignant that I was addressing you knowing, or at least hoping, that you wouldn't understand me? So I saw some smiles, and I think I wanted to do this to illustrate that, I mean, there were smiles because it came as a surprise, I think. And there were also smiles because I am surrounded by like-minded folks who value plurilingualism. And what we want to do, or what I'd like to do, is normalize this for the reasons that Jean-Marc and Helena were saying, that it doesn't have to be threatening. It's part of who we are. Now, to just a couple of points about key issues that the key issues that either get in our way or help us to create a linguistically inclusive society? Well, one can make the scientific argument, as is done in research by people advocating for plurilingual schools. And I will quote, scientific studies show that students learn better and faster when they also learn through their mother tongue, rather than being limited to learning only through the school language. Okay, that's something that's been around from the earliest research on bilingual education to more recent work on plurilingualism in schools. So certainly educating more people about the benefits of learning, of particularly children learning, or I shouldn't say particularly children, but that in public schools, of students being able to learn while using their mother tongue is actually beneficial to their learning goals. That's one important issue. But I want to say that there's a bit of a pendulum swinging from one extreme to the other, at least in the academic world where I am right now, which sees inclusion of, on the one extreme, inclusion of students' L1s as being a way of combating the cruelty of not allowing children to use their L1s in schools, of penalizing, of having been penalized in the past for using their L1 and now wanting to be able to celebrate using their L1s. On the other side of the pendulum is not allowing any L1 and instructing strictly in the L2. I'm sorry, I'm still a little bit discombobulated from my Hungarian, but my point is that right now, I think teaching, for example, teaching languages without allowing any mother tongue use or other language use in the classroom is demonized. And I also think that there is a place to work on second language learning and second language education in schools in such a way. I think there's a place to recognize both the benefits of including additional all languages, mother tongues in education, and there are places where students can be encouraged to acquire and perfect their proficiency in the second language. But at issue is that there are tons of plurilingual people around us, especially in a place like Toronto, where 50% of the population are speaking languages other than English and French in their homes. But they are not the people in power. So the question, and one of you or more of you brought up, it's about economics, but also racism and politics. When the people who regularly use several different languages in their lives, inside the workplace, inside the school, but also outside, have more power, plurilingualism becomes normalized. Resources and education are two of the big, or education as resource needs to be improved to promulgate the use of several of plurilingualism as a normalized thing.
Mm. Thank you, Julie. And you did a great job also to keep reminding ourselves that we are the choir talking to the choir. And if we are to actually really go beyond that, how we do that, because you saw many smiles and you saw many reactions in the chat, because you serve the ideals and the values that everybody on this panel serves, and sort of with our research and with our sort of commitment and so on. And the question is, how do we actually address some of those sort of very big issues that you talk about, the politics and the economics and race and so on, and particularly when we actually see education being plutocratized and sort of, or at least different parts of it. So it's actually really so much integral to the fabric of all our life, which is actually something that we're going to turn a bit later in the panel about how do we actually make all this relevant beyond what, in a sense, the kind of those who are already into that sort of space. Anna, I think a lot to follow up on from Julie's position just now.
Yeah, I think everybody has touched upon a variety of questions, and maybe the bigger picture is that, you know, all of these ideologies about plurilingualism are related also to questions of societal power and dominance. And so, as you, Joe, were saying, you know, it's not like we can suddenly turn our societies into society that are just, you know, just by saying things that we believe. So we're preaching to the choir already here. But I also think that, you know, if I think of the myths and in general terms, the elements that we need to debunk, I would say that first of all, we need to really recognize and have people understand the ideological character of language hierarchies. So give dignity to speakers of different languages. I think that is a very basic and very small step that we can do from the academic perspective, showing, for example, the enormous variety of languages and language variety spoken in not only in the world, but in our own region, cities, schools, etc., and show how this is actually more the normal than the other idea that actually the normal is the one language for everybody. So we can do, when we do that, I think we can also, in a parallel fashion, give dignity to every speaker, be they speaking a foreign language, be they speaking a variety of the language, of the dominant language in a place. I think this is just a basic move. The fact of debunking language hierarchies, saying all languages have their value, all languages have their speakers, all languages have their function, and we should respect that. So that leads us to also debunk this idea that, you know, societies are monolingual, naturally monolingual, because as we look around, even if we do a little bit of linguistic landscapes in cities, but even in rural places now, you find a variety of languages being represented in our everyday life. So that's, you know, just pointing to the environment is already a little step in showing people that those are ideological positions that don't reflect our everyday reality. The second thing I think we need to work on is that liberating ourselves from purism and from the idea of the native speaker. Okay, Julie, I agree with you. There are moments when we have to, you know, put different languages aside. But I think that there is a healthy reaction in classrooms to the fact that if you want to teach English, please don't speak a word of Italian if you're Italian, or don't speak a word of another language. We have seen that actually multilingual pedagogies can be very useful even within the teaching of languages. So maybe there has been an extreme reaction to that, but I think it's kind of healthy, considering that we recognize the value that comes from managing different languages in order to tackle one language, and also from bringing in those languages as a support, even for learning, you know, a specific target language. So purism, native speakerism, I think are our enemy as well, because we have to convince people that you don't need to speak like a British actor in order to function in England or in the UK. You can speak like me. I mean, I have an Italian accent, And I think you do understand me, and I do function in my job. Of course, I am one of those privileged speakers, but I'm no different from anybody else who comes to another country and works and functions in that country by speaking the language the way they can, the way they want to. So I think those on the ideological sides are the important points that we need to debunk. Then on the practical side, we can talk a little later, because I think Joe wants to go to how do we do that, right? But I'll shut up for now.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you very much for really sort of introducing almost the second part of the panel, which is very much as to how we get there. And we have been teaching on those issues for a very long time. We have programs. I see in the chat colleagues are talking about other programs. So in a sense, we've been trying to do what we're talking about really for a long time. So it's not that today we decide, hey, that's it. Let's try and sort of challenge those decades. So why now we can do something that we've been trying to do? Do we see change and so on? And I mean, the need for role models, the responsibility to actually really show the kind of the diversity of the speaker is very important. And of course, the acknowledgement, as you say, Anna, that we're both the choir in this place, but we're also we operate in very privileged spaces, very safe spaces, very supportive spaces. It was sort of, in a sense, so it's actually very different realities and lived experiences, and to many who actually have to negotiate linguistic boundaries in very different ways. I think we actually find ourselves being invited to teach and to work and to interact with colleagues and students in different parts of the world, and we actually see the instantiations of the phenomena everywhere. But we also see them from our perspective, which is definitely a very privileged perspective compared to actually when we see them, on the site, in the field, and so on. So definitely a very important part that we're going to turn our attention to about how do we actually move this conversation and go both into sort of education, which we've touched upon, but also how do we do what we said that we really want to do. I want to pause here and take some questions from those who are engaging with the conversation in the chat, but also to take any questions, because I'm sure we've touched upon a number of issues, and I really don't want this to be a sort of in one-way conversation. So we do have some comments and reactions in terms of the some of the issues as we go along. But if anybody wants to take the floor, you can turn your camera and microphone on and ask a question, or type a question in the chat now, so we can actually also engage more in a conversation with those of you in the room with us now. That is the problem with those systems. You can't see the room. No questions? One more roll of the dice. Okay, so thank you. Please continue interacting. It's really good to kind of have the dialogue through the chat. I'm going then to move on, and what I would like now to turn our attention to is to education and multilingual education, issues around what we're discussing today, multilingualism. Using education in sort of for social change and so on. None of this is new. It has definitely been a priority for a very long time. Multilingual education has also been an ideal, and for different policy bodies also priority. but I don't think we can actually claim that it has been translated to practice. So when we talk about multilingual education, multilingual pedagogies also have been an ideal. We often talk about that, but we also do it in a very monolingual mindset. So I just want to actually turn a little bit our attention to multilingual education, and sort of probe a little bit on that, and to actually also start considering what can be achieved. Jean-Marc, I see an icon that I don't think I've seen before. I don't know if that indicates a hand or something like that. Does it? Okay, over to you. I haven't.
You unmuted me. Great.
No, well, I haven't done anything, but great that you can talk to us again.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So
I don't know.
I wanted to describe a strategy that I have used regularly during a first class, in fact, at BA level or master's level, where I ask them to guess how many languages we have in common. And we typically would have a room with about 20 students. They are Londoners. And I ask them to write down somewhere how many languages they think we have together. And then so people do that, and then we have a useful discussion about, yeah, but is this a dialect or is it a language? And what about sociolects? And and I speak British English, but I can also speak American English. Does that count as two languages? So we have an interesting conversation about definitions of multilingualism, of languages, of dialects, and then we start making our list. And then I ask people to come and write the name of the language if they have specific script in Cyrillic or in Arabic characters or in Chinese characters or in Japanese characters. And the thing is that at the end of that class, there is a feeling of appreciation for the diversity and the richness. And typically everybody underestimates just how many languages people know, or at least have some knowledge of. And then we take a selfie, with the list of all these languages and these beautiful characters, because it gives the languages a degree of embodiment. It's not something just that you say, but you actually can see it written. It becomes real. And then we are standing in front of that long list, and we smile, and we are proud of that linguistic heritage. So, I mean, it's just one little simple trick that I think any teacher could use in a classroom where there are students who have more than one language. And it makes even those who only have one language realize, wow, what a richness in this group. And everybody is pretty proud of themselves that, they contributed something to the group. And they didn't have to speak their language or stand out. It was just mentioning it and writing it down. So I would say that's a simple strategy that I would strongly recommend. And I'll shut up here.
No, Jean-Marc, don't shut up. Can I probe a little bit? So
sure.
we do this. I do this. I'm sure Anna and Julie do it. And I think Helena will have been the recipient at least a number of times, because she's been taught by me, so I know that. So we do biographies, we do body maps, we do maps, we do all that sort of things. We do it because we teach on programs that on the team, they actually say a module on language and society or multilingualism and so on. So we have students who come and they participate. We ask the students to do linguistic landscaping and so on. And then they do those activities. And this is a question for all of us. How much they cohere, linguistic portraits. Yes, Andrew, thank you very much. And we've all written about it. So I think we can now start populating pieces that we've written on multilingualism and so on. Question for all of us, the coherence of all that. So what happens next? So we have these activities. How much of those activities are, again, a minority of what the students do in the curriculum? What do they do after they actually realize, beyond the moment of saying, oh, wow, we have all this sort of wonderful part of this sort of richness. And was it, Andrew, did you bring up the linguistic repertoire? Thank you, because I would actually sort of bring that up. How much those students operate in a sort of linguistic ecosystem that actually empowers them as users of all those varieties to do something more or something further. And what happens if I go to, I don't know, in organic chemistry 3, or in a sense, if I go to other parts where also I do have a sort of a similar, or I also have plurality of voice, plurality and diversity in the class. So I just want a little bit to unpack how we actually see learning activities as such, and sort of connected with multilingual pedagogies or multilingual education, beyond the fact that, of course, we also have the privilege of working with students who come to us because they share the interest and the passion, and so on. So I'll start with you, Jean-Marc, since you've actually self-selected almost, and then I'll turn to Julie. So back to you, Jean-Marc.
Okay, thank you. I think that as teachers, we have to open new horizons to our students, and we need to challenge some perspectives, because even some multilingual students might in fact be stuck in a monolingual ideology. Even British students who are monolingual English may say things like, oh, but I don't know English well. So it goes really to the heart of the matter about how well do you need to know a language, and does it matter whether you know it perfectly or not? That nobody actually knows a language perfectly. And I think that as teachers, obviously we shouldn't have illusions about our power. All we can do is open windows, give nudges. But I think that by emphasizing that the glass is in fact half full rather than half empty, that is a powerful way to push the students onward to discover more of this. And that's why I do it the first class. And I have no illusions. But on the other way, I think that once you have experienced that you probably won't go back to that state. And then I would say that my job is done, or at least the start of that job is done.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Julie.
Thank you. So asking me what the benefits are of, sorry, back to the question. Ask me what the benefits are of multilingual pedagogies is like asking me, why do I like a tropical vacation, or why do I like ice cream? It's like so obviously enriches every aspect of life. Mutual understanding, building friendships, opening up opportunities, future employment possibilities. It's just like, duh. But I break it down into multilingual education for dominant speakers of the dominant language, and so from their perspective, and multilingual education for learners of the so-called dominant language. So we've got this second population I just mentioned are those who we are now welcoming to use their mother tongues in the classroom as they are learning. The first population, multilingual education for people who already are speakers of the dominant language as their own dominant language, many of whom are monolingual. Well, the fact of the matter is that in schools, it's hard to learn languages. So it's hard for many people to learn languages. So maybe we need to pick that apart a little bit. Some students don't like to learn things that are hard for them. I'd say some people are motivated by the challenge of what's hard for them, but many people prefer to learn things that come more easily to them. And learning languages in a classroom setting, in many of the types of classroom settings that are afforded by the underfunded schools and underfunded teachers and undersupported teachers are not that great. So how can that be improved? And I'll give you a few examples. I mean, in Canada, everyone who is not Francophone is required to learn French, at least up through grade 9. And the motivation is pretty low. The resources are not good. They can't get enough teachers who are really excited about teaching and competent to teach French as a second language, and the students don't enjoy it. In Ethiopia, higher education is all done in English, but the students and the professors who have to teach in English are not prepared to do so. So they're doing their best to teach in a language that they are not competent in. And I'm getting this from reports from the educational ministers and presidents in Ethiopia. They need to improve that training for their teachers. So all of that is to say that learning languages and becoming multilingual is hard in a formal setting. Not for everyone, but for lots of people. And as such, and there are also other reasons, such as some of the things I talked about before, like racism, that prejudice some people against wanting to become multilingual. But what I would say we need to do is cultivate as much as possible learning languages at very early ages. And we, particularly in Toronto, but in many parts of the world, are surrounded by opportunities, by people who do speak several languages and do so in their homes, but they are not empowered to share that ability outside of their homes. So I mean, I'm speaking very idealistically, but I think we need to think about those things and how can the people who have learned languages in natural settings, growing up, who naturally are plurilingual, how can they have a bigger effect and impact on the rest of us or on those people who have to learn languages or whose only opportunity to learn additional languages is in a formal classroom setting. And I want to share what I think is the most inspiring network I'm aware of right now. And I'm curious whether any of you have heard of this. It's called the Language Friendly Schools. Have any of you heard of it? At least one? Okay. Well, it's only been around for 2 years. It was started by Dr. Emmanuelle Lepichon-Vorstmann and her colleague, whose name escapes me right now. I'm sorry. I'll look it up in a moment. But it is a network of over 25 schools so far, all over the world. Currently, 6 countries are represented: Netherlands, Canada, Spain, Saba in the Caribbean, China, and UK. And this network actually gives a certification designation to schools that promote plurilingualism and multilingual education, anywhere from having very well-established programs for doing so to just getting started, but welcoming and wanting to promote the uses of many languages in their schools. And there are some really lovely articles and video clips that I'd be happy to share at some point where you can see how it works. But it has instilled such a sense of pride, happiness, security in students and teachers. And it's becoming a world movement. And I hope that it will. I hope that the language-friendly designation will become something that a year from now, all of you will recognize. It's like, oh yeah, it's like, having taken the IELTS or something. It's like a well-known entity. But so they're really walking the walk in addition to talking the talk. The other thing I just wanted to say in response to something that I think Anna had said earlier about the prejudice in favor of so-called native speakers of a language. I'm just delighted to see how much things have changed over the last 20, 30 years. I just gave a workshop to 20 teachers, 20 English as additional language teachers in LINC, which is the language instruction for newcomers to Canada federally funded program. And the vast majority of them were multilingual, previously learners of English as an additional language. And they are the role models. They are teaching these English classes. They are absolutely 100% proficient in English, speaking English with innumerable beautiful accents, and they didn't used to be able to be employed 20 years ago. They couldn't get a job. So I just want to say that there is some movement, and those are our role models. And we need more and more people like that.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you, Julie. Now, it's really important because you're already answering the how can we actually, who are the other stakeholders we need to work with? How do we actually can support exactly all those sort of movements? Because the point of today's panel is not to raise problems and then to go into, in a sense, we've tried, it's a kind of world of asymmetries. We would never be able to actually change. It's also to show that there are indeed local movements, there are indeed sort of efforts and others. And the question is very much how we can work differently to actually really also work with all those other stakeholders that, in a sense, could actually also make good use of what we have in our disciplines and our research with our students and so on. Anna.
Sorry, Joe, I'm sorry, but if I could just say one other thing, because I saw Jean-Marc's comment.
Okay.
Yeah, there's still so much prejudice, and I absolutely don't mean to say that. So Jean-Marc pointed out that a native speaker of the language of instruction, say English, in Thailand would be paid twice as much as someone else. Absolutely, it's horrible, and it needs to be improved. So I don't mean to discount that by any means.
Yeah. Great. I really like the sort of the interaction in the chat, and I now saw Jean-Marc, and absolutely, in a sense, it's actually really how we could identify also where there are these sort of efforts that we can work together, and also what is it that we can make a contribution also on what we have that would actually make and give more prominence to all these other issues that would and all these other symmetries that actually also need to be tackled, and they're fundamental. Anna.
Yeah, I was, sorry, I don't know, my camera is playing out. Yeah, I was thinking, certainly we can do a lot of things as language educators. For example, all the things you mentioned, also, for example, the experiments with intercomprehension, those are important because people realize that they can use their different languages as resources for specific, learning targets. But I also was thinking that, for example, in my work, I try to insert language issues also in courses that are not foreign language courses. And they come up also in those courses, even if we're not focused on languages per se. Those courses also attract maybe students who would not naturally go and learn a language, but are interested in other things. For example, I teach a course on language and migration, and the issues of, for example, language maintenance or negotiations in families come up naturally in that course. And people are, we had very important discussions in those classrooms about how people feel, for example, about the heritage language, or about how the language policies in their families. So I think in terms of creating consciousness, of making consciousness awareness activities, we can really do those in different kinds of courses, not necessarily only in foreign language courses, because I think it's important also to think of language diversity and language rights spanning from the learning of foreign language or second languages to the, increasing the dignity and equality of languages within the territories. So that, for example, can lead to concrete initiatives. I give you an example. One of my students who was her family spoke Spanish, and she spoke both Spanish and English. They were immigrants to the United States. She devised a workshop to do with parents in the school, in one of the schools that she was working with, to exactly discuss issues of language policy, issues of language equality. So I think one way to go is to try and attach our activities to the territories where we are, to institutions, to groups, to people who we can materially push and encourage to do concrete things with parents, with teachers, with institutions. I think that's one of the things we can do, so that we can get to question 3, really get out of our ivory towers as we can, and also not identify language issues with foreign language teaching, because although that is a very important point, there are also other very important points that we need to, as experts or people who are interested in that, we should be thinking about.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you really for getting us into the sort of the concrete, the tangible, and also where is it for the level of change that we're talking about. And given that we've established that the issues we're talking about go to the heart of social inequality, go to the heart of political issues, in order to actually see the change we want to see, we certainly need to work with others. And this is something that this is a personal view, so you may disagree with me, but it is something that we also need to think about, our voice, our tone. How do we actually talk outside the academic family, outside those who we're training for the academic genre? Because in a sense, for us, we are the choir, but also we are a very particular choir. And we talk today to other colleagues, we talk to other students, we speak the same language, we speak the same academic language, we sort of use a particular way of providing argumentation, of structuring our narrative, of sort of providing a particular sort of evidence to point and so on. But what does this mean for those who are not part of this discourse, who are not part of the genre? And we haven't been trained, and we certainly don't train our students to for the sort of the voice, or for translating this work for kind of different other type of audiences. And that's really important if we actually are really to think the natural stakeholders who could actually also work with us, or we can work with them and sort of create much more of a sort of amplify the issue, the voice, and the kind of support a common sort of goal and cause. And that's something that I think we also need to think about in terms of how we train our students and the future generations of researchers and so on. Helena, very natural turn as we talk about education to turn to you. And we're coming towards the closing of the panel. So I'm going then to invite, after Helena, our panelists to give in 1 minute on to how we can actually make our work more accessible, more useful, to give one sort of final point about how we can actually really support this sort of other tangible local efforts. And then I will turn to a message from Professor Stuart Croft, the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of Warwick, who unfortunately could not be with us today because he's unwell, to thank us all and close the panel. So before all that, I'm going to turn to you, Helena, to actually really follow from Anna's point in terms of working with others and the kind of issue around education and multilingual education.
Thank you very much, Jo. Speaking of Anna's point there of working together, in a sense, Jo, as Jo says, we are the choir, but I think one thing that's important to remember is that whilst we are all here speaking, as you said, the same academic language, none of us began to speak in this academic language. We've all learned this as well. Even though those of us who happen to be speaking in English and that's their first language, we've still all learned this in the first place. So when it comes to multilingualism in pedagogy, in a sense, there's the fact that we can teach the English as an academic language, and we teach EAP, but for students to be put outside their comfort zone into a situation where they're learning in different languages and they have different languages around them is, as it were, just another manifestation of the fact that we all need to learn English as an academic language, or whatever it is as an academic language, to start off with. And taking advantage of resources in other languages that are within the academic sphere is a resource to be used, and the one that must be learnt to be used in the same way as using the ones in the original language that people expect to use, whether that be English as what we're talking about, or whether that be any other hegemonic language in any other higher education institution around the world. Going back to what Anna says then, by working together and by making use of networks like Autopia, we have the potential to make available to each other's communities these different resources in order to create that European experience, for example, as it is with Autopia. But what I'm saying could be extended to other situations and other contexts other than English. And if we were to do that, and if that were to be not just facilitated, but actually enforced, it would totally change the dynamic. There are modules going on at Warwick which have had different multilingual elements incorporated into them. For example, Brian Brazo does his where the students all use resources in different languages, different academic papers to produce their coursework. And that's just one example. And you have this similar examples at your universities. Had I had to make the choice when I was an undergraduate of whether to take a module such as that, I would have been nervous. I would have wondered, is my proficiency in this language going to cause me to misread this text? But if it had been enforced, then I would have trusted, okay, this is the same boat that we're all in. I'm not putting myself out here. This is the same journey that we're all going through. And it's okay for me to ask, and it's okay for me to get the assistance with this because we're all on this journey together. So in a sense, taking that element of choice away from students and enforcing it would help to alleviate that anxiety, because you would no longer have an unequal situation. And it is an unequal situation, even when we're talking about all native speakers. I mean, in my own PhD research, I look at speaking and listening skills in schools, and it is very much evidenced in academic achievement how children who are better prepared for using the language of the school and understanding the language of the text that they use, even at that level, and even in their own native language, they learn better, they learn more, and they start to race ahead of their compatriots who don't. So by putting everybody in a more equal situation, and in a compulsory situation of making use of these different resources, we take away that element of choice and that element of anxiety, and we really do make available to students, all the resources that we have, that we use. It's just making that bridge from what we do naturally in our own communities and what we can do and what we can facilitate our students to do.
Thank you very much, Helena, and thank you very much for the great contribution today. I know that you soon need to go and support the network, the migration identity translation network, and really addressing a continuation of the issue that we're discussing today. So thank you very much for this, and thank you for really raising two very important points as we come to the end of that. One is the importance of university alliances, the importance of the policy context, the importance of working in our university environments to actually join forces with our partners to really work together and to think of pedagogic innovation, to think about how we could actually work together in terms of bringing a different way of educating, a different way of sharing, disseminating research, doing research and doing education. And also the other part is that we have really framed education and learning in a way that it's actually very hypocritical in my view, and this is a view to really ask the students who we have disempowered over a series of years to all of a sudden say, go and take risk. Although we have really created a lot of risk in instrumentalizing every little piece and every activity, and students react to that because, of course, if you know that something is attached to a grade and there is an effect in the way that you're actually we have trained our students to think of teaching and learning. In a sense, that is something that, in a sense, we need to really think differently if we want to create this sort of level playing field that Helena is talking about, where we want to embrace a very different way of engaging with resource, of engaging with academic language, of engaging with academic practice. So both really central, and we're certainly not going to do justice to opening up multilingual pedagogies, but really very important that we really need to rethink the design of the modalities of the curricula. We're coming to the end, dear friends. So I'm going to, as we're saying goodbye to Helena, I'm going to give 1 minute to Jean-Marc, 1 minute to Anna, and 1 minute to Julie for one last positioning on how to actually really go a little bit more into what you started saying on working with others, making our research, our findings, our positions accessible and useful. And we're going to then pass on to the closing of the panel. So Jean-Marc, over to you first.
Thank you. I would like to say something about positive psychology, which is a branch of psychology that doesn't just focus on the things that go wrong in life, but also on the things that go right. And I think that that is, in fact, a very powerful theoretical basis for anyone involved in education and in multilingualism. So rather than obsess about the things that aren't right, while acknowledging that I think not everything is right and that there are problems to be addressed, we should also emphasize the things that go right, and that is really important for students, whether they are language students or research students, that we encourage them that you don't get from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. It takes a while, but it's worth the journey. And if you learn something useful, even if that is not yet the full thing, it's good and it should be applauded, and you should be encouraged to continue and to never give up. So resilience, I think, is really what we all need these days, and our students need it too.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Anna.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Marc. It's always nice to hear some positive thought. Yes, I think one thing that maybe we have learned in the panel is that it's good to have this kind of brainstorming with people from different, but that maybe are in the same boat ideologically, but have different experiences. So maybe that's a good way to go, multiply these kind of occasions of exchange among people doing the same work, but in different realities, in different institutions. Another thing I would say is, I think we also learned about a lot of different ways and initiatives. So just take note of all the proposals that people have made here, because they may be useful to different people in different places listening to the panel. And finally, I think it's really, really important for us, as I said before, to build alliances beyond our universities. So build alliances with groups, external groups, and discuss with policymakers. Try to take our ideas out of the even maybe do a little bit of work in simplifying, explaining things in public that in simpler language than we do. So that we can get to our ideas across. And thank you, Joe, for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, Anna. Julie, 1 minute.
Thank you. So we are role models. We should be role models for our students who will become role models for their students. Many of them will be teachers. That's where it is through our students who become teachers that really gives us a much farther reach than in the ivory tower. But I would say what we need to do is get out of the ivory tower. If not ourselves personally, then our students. Not all of our students have to write dissertations and get jobs in academia. Many of them don't want to. They can go into politics, be activists, work for the government. And in the meantime, we, in addition to preaching to the choir, could try to have what might be much more challenging panel discussions just like this one with people who don't agree with us.
Thank you very much, Julie. And I think really picking on the sort of the need of alliances and the need for sort of bringing things together, the kind of level of change really requires more than any single institution can do. So I would really like to pass on the floor really to the message we have from Professor Stuart Croft. And that's very much sort of the panel is part of the Utopia Alliance. And what we're trying to do is really to see how we could work together in a different way. So I will read the message and then we're going to close the panel. So I'm really sorry it has not been possible to join the conversation today. It is a fundamentally important topic we're addressing. Supporting an equal and inclusive society concerns everyone, and it also poses challenges and opportunities for the university of the future. Creating spaces that empower students and colleagues to make full use of their linguistic and cultural capital can and does unquestionably enhance the quality of learning. It is, however, broader than that. It is a condition for students to be able to become the global citizens and leaders in societies where problems and issues to face will know no languages, no disciplines or cultures. And as a result, we need spaces and education central to this, where students can transcend the boundaries of disciplines, languages, and cultures. If we are to support the changing needs of our societies and to produce the global citizens of the future, we need a different dynamic educational model and a learning environment. Future-proof learning designs require a reconceptualization of the learning experiences available to students, going beyond linear binaries of the past towards an educational model which blends mono and multilingualism and empowers the students to apply their learning to global problems, acquire solid disciplinary education alongside experiencing interdisciplinarity. Utopia and the European University Alliances more generally is an opportunity which won't come back for a very long time. Utopia brings together 10 like-minded universities in Europe working to establish a new model. This is a significant commitment to the way we see our role as European global universities. The panel today was part of an event that encapsulates the spirit and ethos of Utopia and our commitment to cultural and linguistic diversity, the Utopia Languages Week. The purpose of this event, which we hope it will become an annual festival, is to discover new angles of cultural diversity and the multilingual campuses of the Alliance, engage with diversity and understanding why it's fundamentally important as it adds value to our societies, education, research, and our world. To be excited and engage with diversity empowers as users of one or many languages or dialects in multilingual and multicultural ecosystems. The first Utopia Languages Week included a whole range of events and brought hundreds of students across institutions together, which shows the value of those events for our communities. More details on the program you can find on the Utopia website and the websites of all participating institutions. We are in the middle of the first Utopia Languages Week. If you didn't have the chance to engage, I encourage you to explore the exciting program that was brought to us this year. Festivals such as this one are important as they combine the academic and the social, and how much we missed the latter during the years of the pandemic. The panel today was said to give us a state of the art in how some of the ideals that have been around for a long time, multilingual education, or at least a multilingually friendly education, can contribute to a better world and become a reality. Utopia will continue serving those goals. We need to be more than the sum of our parts to provide the educational change we need. This is fundamental to provide to our students the learning opportunities they deserve, and to our societies the global citizens they need. I thank again the panelists and wish you all a great continuation of the first Utopia Languages Week. So, only to echo that, thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear friends, and to all of us who attended today, participated, made great contribution to the chat. I do agree we really need more panels such as today's. The quality of the conversation was up to the level of the panelists. It was exactly and exceeded my expectations. So thank you very much for being so generous with your time. And I think we should definitely take Stuart's message and make this an annual event, and I hope to repeat that this time next year, hopefully having more opportunities to celebrate more initiatives that actually are successful in bringing some of the change that we want to see. So thank you very much, and hope to continue the conversation in many different other ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.